folks, Scott here, back from my lovely vacation, and I am greeted by the new My Monthly Hero October 23 kits. Looks like we are going to a snowy forest at nighttime. Some Christmas stuff. Let's dig in and see what we've got. For the classic kit, we are treated with 3 large scene fancy dies, which would be this tree and snow, these trees and snow in a square frame, and there's also this one with a moon, some stars. 4 word dies, which we've got, looks like Happy Christmas, Merry Winter. These have not only the word dice, but also a shadow die on them. That's our main part of our classic kit. And then we get this 3-inch by 4-inch swirl snow clear stamp. Looks like we've got 4 rings of snow and a line of dots here. This would be a good hanging chain for an ornament or something. That's our 3 by 4-inch stamp set. Then we also get a massive amount of cardstock. We have 4 sheets of the ever popular pitch black cardstock. These are all 5.5 by 8.5 inches. We also have 4 sheets of white, slate, winter blue, and frosted blue. This frosted blue has a nice pearlescent sheen to it. You can see that right there. And finally, we get a 1-ounce bottle of super opaque white acrylic spray. This should be great for making splatters of stars on your skies. That's everything in the classic kit. The premium kit additions are, we have a 4 by 6-inch Nordic layering clear stamp set. So it looks like we've got ornaments here, decorations for on the ornaments, more sentiments, happy holidays, season's greetings, wishing you peace and joy, and a big Merry Christmas. Lots of holly and berries and snowflakes. And we get 3 mini peeking dies. These are kind of mini versions of the peeking animals that they have, that Hero Arts has in their new Christmas release. Looks like a bear, a fox, and a deer, all peeking out from around trees or bushes or doorways. And then finally, 20 vellum snowflakes, which are these lovely foiled vellum snowflakes. There's, looks like 4 flourishes, 4 large snowflakes, 4 of these snowflakes, 4 of these snowflakes, 4 of these snowflakes. These are all nice. Vellum and foiled. That's a single one right there. Nice translucency and yet lots of foil. Looks like we are shifting to winter and shifting to the holidays. A little bit of Merry Christmas here. Let's put on our galoshes and head into the snow. And here we have my 10 cards for the month. We've got everything on white card bases. Looks like we've got 1 mini slimline card in there. And we got this huge stack of cardstock in our classic kit. And these 3 large scene fancy dies. So I figured I'd take the cardstock and these dies and start working on my first card. As usual, I will try to make my first 5 cards using only items from the classic kit. And for our first card, we have Happy Winter. Using all 3 of those dies, the cardstock in our kit, and the stamps in our set. I cut a piece of the frosted blue cardstock to 4 1/4 by 5.5, and I die cut the largest fancy die from that. Now that's easy to line up because you can line that right up with the top edge of your panel. I cut a piece of the winter blue cardstock to a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch panel and die cut the second die from that. Now you just have to make sure that you line it up on the cardstock so that you leave cardstock below it so that it can provide color behind all your snow swirls on the first one. So I lined that up on a panel, die cut that. That's the winter blue from our cardstock. And then taking in mind that the farther away you go, the lighter things get, I grabbed some Hero Arts, this is Arctic cardstock, and die cut the third die from that. So that you also have to take into account where on the panel it is. Again, I cut it from a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch piece of cardstock, and I left the bottom of that so that it would provide color behind the second layer's snow swirls. On a white A2 card base, I stamped the swirl snow stamps with embossing and watermark ink, and I embossed those with glacier blue embossing powder. This was embossing powder that we got in the My Monthly Hero October of 2020 kit. Worked really well. I think that matches the winter blue cardstock almost perfectly. I did add the single line of stamps to the edges of the swirl stamps just to fill those in the little windows here. Emboss those in the same thing. I die cut the sentiment from the frosted blue cardstock and its shadows from some heavyweight vellum. I glued those together. I glued the big die cuts directly to the card front, and I added the die cut sentiments towards the bottom. I think it's really interesting how those swirl snow stamps and the fancy dies work together to really draw you into this wintry scene. Now, once I finished this off, I really liked it, but that Hero Arts Arctic cardstock is a little green. It doesn't necessarily read so green, but it's a little green. If I had dug a little deeper, I might have used these instead. I might have done the frosted blue for the top, and then gone to a Hero Hues Periwinkle for the second layer, and then that winter blue for the third layer. Now those are a little bit more in the blue family. I didn't dig that deep when I did this and just went straight to the lightest blue Hero Hues cardstock there is, which is the Arctic. It's a touch green. I might go do the same thing with these 3 colors of cardstock instead. Happy winter. Really interesting how all of these pieces work together. Now I have to admit that this third fancy scene die gave me a little bit of a pause because it has this window in it, and what's behind that window is the sky, right? But then we've got stars and moons that are die cut on the front of that panel, which would mean that that's the sky. So which is the sky? Are they both the sky? I know. I can be so literal sometimes, but I decided to dig through my stash looking for some white glitter cardstock that I could maybe use to fill in the die-cut moons and stars. While I was digging around, I found this black glitter cardstock. Oh my goodness, this caught my eye. This was actually from the January 2021 My Monthly Hero kit, that fabulous B kit that I think got voted as the most popular kit of that year. This was in that kit. This caught my eye, and I thought it would work perfectly with this third die. So for card number 2, we have a Merry Christmas card in black and gray. Well, that's interesting. So I cut a piece of that black glitter cardstock to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. I glued that down to an A2 card base. I cut a piece of the slate cardstock that's in the kit to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and I die cut the fancy die from that, positioning it so that there'd be plenty of room at the bottom for the sentiment. Actually position that up towards the top 2/3 of that card. Left plenty of room for our sentiment. The fancy word die is die cut from the same black glitter cardstock. And I did some partial die cutting to get the 2 shadow dies to cut 1 piece of vellum. Just stopped my Merry early, stopped my Christmas early, lined them up with how I wanted this. I wanted this a straight right across the bottom. Little partial die cutting gave me 1 shadow behind both of those words. I like that very much. I glued the glitter words down to the vellum shadow and added that to the front of the card. For a final touch, I added some small red and blue sequins to Christmas up the tree a little bit. I do think this is the die that's probably going to be voted the die most likely to be used alone from this kit. And I really almost don't mind the sky confusion when it's used this way. I think that's very stunning and That black glitter paper is so cool. Merry Christmas. Of course, then I figured you could always just cut away the sky and just use the trees and the ground on that third die as well. So for my next card, we have a Silent Night card with that sky trimmed away from that third die. Now, I die cut the bottom, the ground part of all three dies from some multimedia cardstock. Again, taking into account the spacing and providing color to the swirls that are in front of it. Then I paper pieced all of the trees from some browns and green cardstock from my stash. I did cut away all of the white trees and glued the brown trees behind the multimedia white. I also used a little alcohol marker on the front trees to add a little bit of dimension. So I trimmed the whole sky away from die number 3, leaving just the trees, and then I die cut and fussy cut more of those trees and glued them behind the white snow there just to fill out that forest a little bit. I spattered a 4 1/8 inch by 5 3/8 inch piece of pitch black cardstock using the white acrylic spray, and I glued all the die cut layers on top, trimming where necessary. So there's a little thin white frame around everything. The moon is the slate die cut that was cut from this card, painted with more of that acrylic white paint. I just put that a little on a stamp block and used my paintbrush to paint up our moon there. Really good opacity with this paint. I just glued the moon down behind all the trees. I found this sentiment in my stash. I thought I had a Silent Night sentiment. Sure enough, it's in a stamp set from Love from Lizzie. That great little Silent Night sentiment right there. This is the Silent Night add-on stamp set from November of 2019. I believe that's still available. If you want to find that stamp set, I'll put a link to that on my website, cardcutups.com. I stamped that sentiment on a scrap of plain white cardstock with intense black ink. I die cut it with a Hero Arts Nesting Infinity Circle die, and I added that to the card front with a little foam tape. A snowy night in the forest, indeed. Silent night, snowy night. I really like this one. Now, if you followed me for any length of time with these Hero Art kits, you know that if we get portrait orientation fancy dies in our kit, I am always going to try and see if I can use them on a landscape orientation. So for card number 4, we have a Love You card in a landscape format. Again, sticking to the old adage that things get lighter the farther away they are, I die cut the fancy dies from pitch black, slate from the kit, Hero Arts Pebble cardstock, and the background is just some plain gray Staples cardstock. I keep gray Staples cardstock and ivory Staples cardstock in my stash just to use for scrap cardstocks or for creating a prototype, and sometimes they actually get used in a card too. That's just the right color. My grays go from black to lighter gray. So I used 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch panels of all those colors, and I die cut the black piece using the top straight edge of that die as a guide. So again, this is partial die cutting. I lined that top edge up and lined it up so that the tree would be on the edge of the card, and die cut that out only to there, just partial die cut to there. Then I lined up the other side, again matching the top piece with what was left, and then only die cut this part of that die. Then it was just a simple matter of cutting between those straight lines at the top to finish out that frame. Of course, doing it this way removes the bottom, so the bottoms were not touching. So I cut a piece of that pitch black cardstock to 1/4 inch and then just glued it behind the tree pieces on the bottom, and that completed my frame for the whole card. The slate layer was cut with the single tree die, and it's very easy to extend this die because there's no 4 1/4 inch cutoff at the end. So I just extended that this way and cut the entire 5 1/2 inch width of cardstock. I did the same thing with the third die, cutting that from the pebble cardstock, and I just continued that over on the right as well. I did, of course, also trim away all of the trees and the sky from that third piece. So I stamped the snow swirl stamps and 3 of the single line stamps curved around the edges on a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch panel of my Staples gray cardstock. I stamped those with unicorn ink and embossed them with white embossing powder. And then I glued all those layers down to a white A2 card base. That left me with a fairly limited amount of room to add a sentiment. I didn't really want to die cut a sentiment, so I went with this simple love you from the, this is the Hero Arts Mini Everyday Messages stamp set. I don't think this is available anymore. Love you right there. I could have gone with miss you, though that seemed a little big for that space. As far as the image goes, miss you might be better than love you, but hey, if you live in Alaska and it's Valentine's Day, this is a perfectly appropriate Valentine card. Love you. And yes, those dies actually work quite easily in a landscape orientation. Now those concentric circles of snow, the swirl snow stamps, are really quite very interesting, but what if we could make an actual spiral out of them? So for my next card here, we've got Reach for the Stars, where I've turned that swirl snow stamp into an actual radial star stamp. Let's call it that. Reach for the Stars. I think that's interesting enough to feature on a card all by itself. Now, I cut the 3 circle stamps at the places where there was a little extra space between the dots. So on the inner one, that was right there. On the second one, I think it's right there is the cut. And on the third one, right there is the cut. And see, just that little extra space in those 3 places allows you to cut that circle apart. And then you can arrange them on your MISTI in a spiral shape. That's stamp 1, stamp 2, stamp 3, and then that's the 4th straight line stamp. Everything just lined up on the lid of my MISTI. So I stamped that onto a panel of the winter blue cardstock with unicorn white ink. I embossed it with white embossing powder, and then I ink blended Splash and Blue Hawaii reactive ink over the spiral with the dark blue Hawaii in the center and the splash around it, all fading out. Nice little ombre there. And then I stamped that final little star, which is actually a snowflake, but I'm calling it a star. Stamped that in the center, again with unicorn white ink and white embossing powder. I die cut the stamped panel with a Lawn Fawn stitched rectangle die, added a thin black mat behind that, and then a thicker mat of that frosted blue cardstock. I glued those down to a white A2 card base, and I grabbed this sentiment from the, My Monthly Hero December 2022, I call it the Space Cadets stamp set. December of last year, Reach for the Stars, there's the sentiment right there. I stamped that in intense black ink, and I did emboss that as well with some clear embossing powder. I think the swirl snow stamps work perfectly well as stars, and that spiral really draws you in as well. Reach for the stars or the snow. Okay, that covers my 5 cards using only the classic kit. I was a little worried that I wouldn't be able to stretch that kit out to 5 cards because that's basically the only stamp we've got, and then we've got those dies, but we got it. There's 5 cards there. Now we can dig in to the premium kit supplies. Now, these mini peeking fancy dice are pretty cute. Peeking images seems to be a big theme at Hero Arts this season. Though these dies are really, really small. I thought they were a bit silly used with the fancy tree dies. I mean, the deer would have to be in like this tree, behind this tree over here, because we don't have a butt to the deer. So if he was there, it's just magic that he's not between those two or this. So the deer's a little limited, and actually the scale is not quite the same. If this is our deer, then our fox is pretty big and our bear is really tiny. I thought these were totally wacky, But I figured that instead of peeking out from behind trees, maybe they could be peeking out from behind a sentiment label. So here we have my 6th card, Season's Greetings, featuring that little fox and our deer peeking dies. I cut another panel of the winter blue cardstock to 4.5 by 3.25 with a lawn fawn stitched rectangle die, and I embossed that with an old Doris snowflake. Oh, here it is. And I embossed that with an old Doris snowflake embossing folder. I think this is has been my standby go-to snowflake embossing folder for a long time. I embossed that panel with the folder, and I did some ink blending around the edges with blue Hawaii reactive ink. And then I added some unicorn white to the top of the embossing with a small ink brayer. I think this is a Tim Holtz ink brayer. Just run this on your ink pad and then lightly over your embossing, and we'll add some nice white color to the top parts of your embossing. I need to use my little brayer more often. I added a dark blue mat behind the embossed panel, and I glued those to a white A2 card base. Now, I stamped the sentiment on a scrap of white cardstock using unicorn white ink and white embossing powder. I trimmed that to 1.5 inches by 3 1/8 inches, and I ink blended the splash ink over the whole sentiment. I die cut the fox from a scrap of ivory cardstock. Again, that was a scrap of my Staples ivory cardstock, and the deer from a scrap of white cardstock. And I added some color to both of them with colored pencils. That deer really looks a little surprised, doesn't he? I added a thin dark blue mat behind the sentiment, and I attached the animals to the edges. Now, the deer would have made the sentiment way too wide if he was sticking out the way the die was set. So he would have been like way off the side there. So I thought him peeking out over the corner would work perfectly for that. He's standing straight up. Our little fox looks like he's actually holding that sentiment banner. I glued those to the banner, and then I die cut some more of the trees from the first fancy die and trimmed those out with the lawn fawn stitched rectangle die so they shared the stitching, glued those on top of my embossed and inked panel, and then I glued the sentiment and our peeking animals to the front of that with some foam tape. Season's Greetings, I finally added a bunch of these clear crystal sequins all over the place for some nice sparkle on this. I really like the deer's antlers sticking up over above the panel. A Season's Greetings card with our little peeking critters fancy dies. Now, the vellum snowflakes in our kit are quite beautiful. The foil parts are so thin and detailed that I immediately ruled out popping anything up with foam tape. So what could you get if you just glued them directly to a card? So for our next card, we're featuring the vellum snowflakes we've got. There you go. Wishing you peace and joy. A big, shiny, beautiful card here with snowflakes, all of the snowflakes in our kit. I began by stamping the sentiment on a panel of winter blue cardstock using the embossing and watermark ink and embossed with some Hero Arts silver embossing powder. And then using a Xyron sticker maker, I covered the back of our 4 snowflakes with adhesive and glued them to the panel around the sentiment. There was a touch more room between those snowflakes, so I filled that in with some of the snowflake stamps. I embossed those in the silver embossing powder as well. I die cut that panel with a Simon Says Stamp modern postage stamp rectangle die. I thought that was a fun edging on that. I die cut some white cardstock to 5 inches by 3 3/4 inches with another lawn fawn stitched rectangle die and added a thin gray mat behind. I ink blended a little shadow on the white panel with some Hickory Smoke Distress Oxide ink and the matching postage stamp stencil. I glued everything together and then down to a white A2 card base. The silver embossing powder matches the silver foiling really nicely, and there's enough shine here that I felt like there were no embellishes needed, although Some silver dots would certainly work, as well as clear crystals, wishing you peace and joy, and lots of snow. So, the Nordic layering clear stamp set. That's interesting. But other than the 4 large sentiments, the stamps are actually fairly small. I figured I'd soldier on with the sentiments in this stamp set. We've got Season's Greetings, Wishing You Peace and Joy, and I thought that a mini slimline card might actually make some of those smaller stamps go a little bit further. So for card number 7, we've got our Happy Holidays card. Some nice shine there. You know, I strive to use all of the stamps in a stamp set any chance I can. And keeping with the blue theme of this kit, I stamped the sentiment on the front of a mini slimline card. This is 3 1/4 by 6 1/4, using splash and blue reactive inks for a bit of an ombre effect. And I embossed that with clear embossing powder. Then I started filling in the background, starting with the 4 ornaments used with the same ink, the splash and the blue Hawaii, for a little bit of an ombre effect. I stamped and embossed the ornament decorations using embossing and watermark ink, and embossed those with that same silver embossing powder. Then I stamped the holly and the berries around the sentiment with the same 2 blue inks. More embossing was needed, so I stamped the snowflakes with the embossing and watermark ink, and again embossed those with the silver embossing powder. Lots of shine on this card. Even the sentiment has a good shine. I finally did a tiny little bit of splash ink blending on the 2 vertical sides of the card. It's hardly noticeable, but it does soften the edges of this mini slimline card as well. This is actually, truly, completely a 1-layer card. Completely 1 layer. How long has it been since I've done a plain, straightforward 1-layer card? Happy holidays! So most everything has been blue or gray or black, going along with the basic color palette of this kit. So I thought now would be a good time to introduce some color. Merry Christmas is the only sentiment I had left, so I figured I'd go with red, and we've got a red, black, and white Merry Christmas card. This is Cherry Core Ink. Hero used Cherry Core ink, a nice rich red, perfect for pairing up with black. I stamped the sentiment on a panel of white cardstock with the cherry ink, and then used a very small blending brush, this little bitty small blending brush, to add some intense black ink along the bottom edges of the text stamp. Now, I actually thought about cutting that stamp in 2, but the distance between the Y and the M was way too close to get a good cut in there, so a small blending brush certainly worked to add a little black to the bottom of all of that text and give us a little bit more of an ombre effect for that sentiment. Merry Christmas! The rest of the stamps are arranged around the sentiment and stamped with the same inks, the intense black ink and the cherry core ink. There's actually quite a number of possibilities with how you can layer up these stamps. I kept things pretty straightforward while staying true to the red and black palette. I die cut the stamped panel with a Lawn Fawn stitched rectangle die, added a thin mat of red and a thin mat of black, and glued those to a white card base. And for our final embellishments here, I added some red and black gems, highlighting the flowers and dotting the eye. Merry Christmas. I think the red and black are very modern, very contemporary, with just a little bit of sparkle for those who can't resist it. Now, this mini Peking bear seemed a little creepy to me. I mean, if you put him at a tree, I just thought he seemed like a peeping Tom or a peeping bear or something. I wasn't quite sure how to use them. Maybe it was because his scale was so small. I mean, even with these big trees, I mean, he's just a little bitty bear cub. So I actually had a couple of these guys sitting on my desk, and they actually inspired my last card, which is I've Got Your Back. I die cut the bears from 2 colors of the Hero Arts Colors of Earth cardstock. I added some muzzles and bellies with a simple white colored pencil, and I glued them together. Now, I did trim the belly of our front bear just a little, giving it a little bit of a curve under his arm. They are on a piece of pitch black cardstock die cut with a Hero Arts Tag Frame Infinity die. I printed this sentiment on the front of a white A2 card base using my Silhouette software and the American typewriter font. There's a link to the video I have for printing your own sentiments right up there in the corner. I glued the tag to the printed card front and added the bears with foam tape. This is a terrific card. I love this. I've Got Your Back is an amazing sentiment, and the bears really illustrate that point with total charm. I am completely loving this. I've got your back. And just like that, we're done with our 10 cards inspired by the My Monthly Hero October 2023 Classic and Premium kits. What an interesting batch of cards this month. I first thought all of these seemed quite simple, but why did they take me so much time? Then I started describing what was going on, writing about them on my blog, and I realized that there's a lot more going on here than what simply meets the eye. I do detect a theme here. The large scene fancy dies are pretty spectacular, especially when used together, and actually quite versatile as well. Large die-cut sentiments are always a great addition to your stash, and between the optical illusion of the swirl snow stamps and the layering possibilities of the Nordic layering stamps, this is a really useful collection of stamps as well. I did manage to use every single one of the Nordic stamps and almost all of the swirl snow stamps. I tell you, that white acrylic spray is terrifically opaque, makes for great spatter of stars and or snow. The vellum snowflakes are beautiful. They warrant another look. There have no puns this month, but I think the snuggling bears make up for that. Let me know which cards are your favorite, please. Now, these kits are still available at Hero Arts. If you see something you like here, or if I've given you another even better idea, then please use my links in the description down below to grab a kit for yourself. Your support helps maintain this page and is always hugely appreciated. Thank you so much for sharing some of your precious time with me here today. I am appreciative and so humbled by your attention. I'm sorry this post is so late this month, but when my vacation, and when I say well-deserved, I really mean it. My well-deserved vacation really put me behind this month. I also forgot how tiring traveling can be. West Coast jet lag really got me this time. Please remember to like me, list me, pin me, post me, share me with all your friends and enemies. Have a safe and happy Halloween. Don't run with scissors. And as always, I send you and yours love and light and happy crafting. For more detailed information, better pictures, and product links, please visit my website at cardcutups.com.